All right, good morning, everyone on Zoom. You hear me okay? Excellent. Good to see everyone. All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning. Share to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Stephen Terizin, for dedicating all of his Shumer Drushos this month in memory of Steve's father, Burim Tzvi Ben Chaim, Leah Sol as a schos refuah shlema for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and for all of those wounded in Eretz Yisrael. Yonasan and Rachel Wolf for a complete and lasting refuah for Rafa'al Yitzchak Baruch Ben Esther, Sherry and Sarah Wolaski in the schos refuah shlema for their grandson Zechar Yudov Ben Parol Shira, Azriel and Iris Miller in the schos of the holy soldiers of the IDF, and in the merit of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Mark and Elsa Lussman in memory of Elsa's father, Morris Cantor, Moshe Leib Ben Chaim Zichron Livracha on the occasion of his 21st yahrzeit, and Alan and Andy Stowis in memory of Andy's father, Chaim Tzvi Ben Avram, and in honor of the courageous IDF soldiers who are fighting on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael. And of course, again, we have all of Maseches Bava Kamma dedicated to Ilui Nishmas Master Sergeant Elio Michael Harush. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, his Neshama Shtav and Aliyah and his family in Chama. But with that, let us begin. We have a very exciting daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is daf Vav 6. And we are picking up a Meretz Hashem on Hamid Beis 5b. We left off Ela Lamai Hilchasa Kasvinhu Rachmana Lehilchosein. So this is now 2, 4, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom. So also remember again, the way we ended off yesterday's daf is we highlighted the idea that technically speaking, one did not need to articulate all 4 of the primary categories of damages. Right? In other words, he didn't have to write Shar, Bar, Ma, Vehever. Technically speaking, you probably could have written 2 of them and learned out the other 2. We could have learned out the unwritten 2 from the written 2. Obviously, if the Torah goes out of its way to write all 4, and by definition, the Mishnah goes out of its way to codify all 4, that tells us that what? That tells us that Halacha L'maisa, there's something unique that is being conveyed. So this is very interesting. So the Gemara therefore says, L'may Hilchasa. So why did the Torah go out of its way to list all 4 of the primary categories? So watch this. I was saying, of course, the answer is, even before we get to it, the answer is because each of them have something unique. Each is unique. So what's unique? Here we go. Karen, Lachalik ben Tama Lemuades. So Karen comes to teach us the distinction, or the unique aspect of Karen is that there's a chilik between Tam and Muad. So remember again, by every other form of damages, there's maximum liability for a first-time offender. Karen, or a Shar, is the only time where there's a distinction between a first-time offender and a second-time offender. Or I should say, really, it's a first-time offender and a third-time or fourth-time offender. Good. Shein v'regel, lepocham rishus rabim. Shein and regel is written, why? In order to exempt shein and regel liability in the public domain. Rashi says over here, it's interesting. If you look at the first Rashi on the first wide line, Rashi says Lapocham b'rishus harabim tichsiv bahu ubir b'stei achar. We'll talk about this more, but the way the Torah phrases the damage. Remember again, what shein and regel? Shein, damage done through hana, through consumption or through hana. Regel, damage done through activities of daily living. The way the Torah phrases that is ubir b'stei achar. My animal goes and damages in another field, which indicates to us that, the Gemara learns out, that shein and regel only creates liability when done in private domain. But if shein and regel damage is done in Rishus Harabim, there is no liability for that. Okay, bar, liftar ba'as hakelim. We'll say very interesting. Bar, the damage of bar of pit, one is only liable, ultimately again, if a person or an animal is damaged. But if utensils are damaged in the pit, ultimately no liability. No liability. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you are chayiv for damage liability for utensils in a pit, what does it come to exclude? Liftar ba'as ha'adam. It comes to exclude people. In other words, that should only be chayiv for kelim or for animals which fall into a pit, but not for a person. I'll say, by the way, what would be the logic? What would be the logic that there'd be an exam, right? I dig a pit. I'd suppose say, again, and we'll see all of this. Here's what we know is, you're not chayiv for all types of damage in a pit. So according to the first opinion, so in a pit, you're chayiv ultimately, again, for man and for animal, right? But exempt for utensils. According to the second opinion, you're chayiv for utensils. You're chayiv for utensils and animals, but pater for man. Why would there be an exemption? I dig a pit, someone falls into my pit. Why would there be exemption for that? Right. So interestingly enough, we'll see. Actually, I mentioned this I think a couple of days ago in a different context, quoting from the Gemara Maseches Makos, the ibayle leiyune. People should be careful. People should be careful, right? Watch where you're going. So a pit liability, so in other words, it could very well be that a person could avoid bar damage. If you're not avoiding bar damage, especially also remember again, going back to what we said before, where is bar? Where is bar located? Rishus Harabim. Right? That remember again, bar is public domain. So especially in the public domain, where a person has to be conscious and a person has to be aware and a person has to be cognizant. So again, it's interesting. There's a school of thought that says one would not be liable for damages done within a bar. Very interesting. Okay, we'll come back to it. In general, again, we'll say that concept of the lashon of the Gemara in Maseches Makos is di'ibai le'iyune. Be careful. Be careful. Sometimes things go wrong in life, and we say, "Oh, it's an accident." Okay, could be an accident, but just because something was an accident doesn't mean that there's not liability, right? After all, again, a person is obligated to live life in general with a heightened sense of vigilance, so that therefore to be able to avoid many of the mistakes in life, whether they're interpersonal mistakes or again monetary mistakes, to live life with eyes open, a heightened sense of vigilance. Adam, what does Adam come to? So include. So Adam, I will say, is unique. Why is Adam unique? Because we will say when a person damages specifically another person, not only is there compensatory damages, but what else is there? There are these other buckets. Rashi says over here, 3 lines there from the bottom, l'chayvo ba'arba dvarim, tsar, right? I have to pay for pain and suffering. Ripui, doctor's bills. Sheves, lost wages, and boshes, humiliation. Now, of course, there's another which is actual nezek, damages. So in addition to damages, which everyone has to pay damages, again, Adam is unique because Adam has these 4 other buckets of payments. Eish, liftar ba'asatamun. This is interesting. Also, we'll talk about this as well. Eish is written why? To exempt tamun. Also, we're going to see that when a fire destroys, there is only liability when my fire destroys something that belongs to someone else that was visible. But if someone has my fire, let's say, goes out of my property, destroys something on Ruvain's property, but the item that is destroyed on Ruvain's property was tamun, was hidden, there's no liability for that for Eish. Again, we'll learn all of that. We'll learn all of that as well as we go by this. So we'll say. So the point over here is what? The point over here is, as much as technically speaking, one could have learned liability for certain categories of damages from other categories of damages, and therefore maybe one could have made the argument that you don't have to write all 4 categories. The Torah goes out of its way to list all 4. Why? Because they're unique. Each one has its own unique quality, which could not have been learned out from the other. In other words, I could have learned out liability one from the other, but each one has its own unique aspect, and that uniqueness could not have been learned out from the other. Therefore, all must be explicitly stated. Incredible. Rabbi Huda de Mechayiv on this ketam. I'm sorry, I didn't finish. Rabbi Huda de Mechayiv on this ketam be'esh la'asuyimai. According to Rabbi Huda, who holds that even if my fire destroys something which is hidden. So what does Eish come to include? La'asuye type above, la'asuye lichka niro v'sichsecha avan. To teach me a case where I have liability, where if a fire leaves my field and my fire goes ahead and literally lichka niro means that it like licks the land of my fellow. In other words, I will say there's liability for singeing the earth that belongs to someone else, or sichsecha einav, or avanav, or same idea, singeing stones. That fire liability doesn't just go ahead and cover actual loss, but it covers also damage. Rashi says over here, literally again, if my fire like licks at the plowed field of my friend, so we'll discuss this idea that when it comes to Eish, not only is there liability ultimately for actual destruction, but there could be liability for even some level of smaller damage. Good. Sefer Rabbi say turns out that halacha l'maisa, you need to write all four categories because each one has some unique aspect which could not have been gleaned from the other. Incredible. Hasada Shava Shaban. So Rabbi says, remember again, after the Mishnah goes through all the different categories and explains why they're different, the Mishnah says Atzad Hashava. What does it mean Atzad Hashava? The common denominator. So we'll say, what is the common denominator ultimately again between all of the categories of damages? Here's what the Mishnah said: Shedarkan lahazik ushmirasan alecha ukishehizik chav hamazik lehashalin tashlumi nezek b'meitav haaretz. The common denominator, I say, is these are all things, right? These are all things that damage, all things that you are responsible to watch over, and all things that when they do damage, I, the owner of the object, am responsible to pay for damages. That's the common denominator. So it says the Gemara, La Suyemai. I will say now, in general, whenever you see like a tzara shava is a common denominator, but a common denominator that creates a paradigm. So therefore, again, the paradigm that is created in the Mishnah is any object that damages, right, that I have responsibility to watch, and that is owned by me, if it damages, I'm chayiv. Now again, the last part of the Mishnah is I'm chayiv to pay from the best of my property if I'm paying with real estate, but we'll leave that on the side. So what is coming to be included over here? Right? What else is being included over here? Lasuye mai. So now that we have this paradigm, what else is it including? So it's actually a really interesting Gemara. Abaye says like this: Lasuye avno sakino umaso shenichem berosh gago v'naflo beruach metzuye v'hezigo. Interesting. What does it come to include? Coming to include the following case. Well, so imagine the following situation. I placed my stone, my knife, or my package, my load, on top of the roof, right on a rooftop, and then a ruach mitzuya. Ruach mitzuya means a regular wind came along, knocked it down, and it damaged. So based on the paradigm of the Mishnah, I would be chayiv. The Gemara says, 1 second. Hechidami, what's the case? Now, if the objects of say damaged as they were falling down, then that really falls into the category of Eish. Because remember again, how does fire damage? By moving, right? So again, if they're damaged, in other words, if I place it on the roof, the regular wind blows it, it falls down, and as it's coming down, it lands on someone, right? The knife falls into someone, the stone hits someone, the package lands on someone's head, right? So, or animal for that matter, it doesn't have to be a person. So then that's Eish. So Maishna Eish. So what's unique about Eish? Dikoach acher me'urav bo, umamoncha, ushmirasu alecha. So because remember again, what's Eish? Eish is, number one, that it only works because there's another force involved in it, right? In Eish, it's usually wind, right? So there's another force involved in it. I own it, and I'm responsible to watch over it. So Haninami, Ksobo said that would be the same thing as this case of the stone, of the knife, and of the package. Koach achar me'urav bahen. There's another force involved. In the case of the stone, the knife, and the package, what's the other force involved? The wind, right? The wind. Umamoncha, and these objects belong to me. Ushmiras alecha, and ultimately, again, I'm responsible to watch them. So it's not really a chiddush because L'maisa again, that's Eish. So I guess I agreed there'd be liability, but that's because it falls under the umbrella of Eish. The Gemara says Ella must be basar denaichi. It must be able to say that I place these objects on the roof. A ruach mutzi, a regular wind came along. And we'll say, by the way, the reason we'll get to this, but why are we setting it up as a ruach mutzi, a regular wind, as opposed to a ruach she'ena mutzuya? Because we'll say if I place something on my roof, and the truth is it's strongly embedded enough, or placed enough, or anchored down enough that a regular wind wouldn't move it. But now like a gale force wind comes along and blows it off, I'm not responsible for that. right? Then I'm not responsible. So that's why, again, we're talking about over here where halacha l'maisa, a regular wind moved it. Okay, so rather it must be Ella basar denaychi. So it must be the case like this. I placed the object on my roof. A regular wind came and blew it down. It fell down to the ground. Now, once on the ground, it damaged. So Gemara says, okay, let's analyze this. Idafkarinu. So if we're talking about a case where I made the object hefker, once it fell to the ground, then bein l'Rav, bein l'Shmuel, hainu bar. Then I will say everyone agrees that a hefker object on the ground is bar. That's bar, right? So then again, so obviously it falls under the category of bar. So Maishna bar came to why? What's unique about bar? Here's, remember again, we always go back to our definitions. What's bar? Shechein tchilas asiyas lenezek. A bar from its inception is ready to damage. Mamoncha, it belongs to me. Ushmiras alecha, and ultimately I have responsibility to safeguard it. So we'll say that's the definition. If that's the case, then when you have these objects that blow off the roof, fall onto the ground, it satisfies the same criteria. Haninami, tchilas asiyasan lenezek, right? From the beginning, they're ready to damage. Mamoncha, they belong to me. Ushmirasan alecha, and ultimately, again, I am responsible to watch over it. So we'll say, so it's bar. Rather, it has to be the lo afkarinu. Rather, it must be the case. I placed the objects on the roof. They blew off the roof. They're on the ground, and I didn't make it hefker. Interesting. I didn't make it hefker. So it says, Shmuel da'amar kula mi barod lamanu hainu bar. So according to Shmuel, even though again it's not hefker, it's still going to be bar. To which the Gemara says, li olam dafkarinu. In reality, I made it hefker. Velo damu labar. And I will say ultimately again, it's not compared to bar. Why is it not like bar? So ma labar shekin ein koach achar mu'urav bo. Tomar bahani shekoach achar mu'urav bahen. So I will say here's the fundamental difference. Bar has no other force involved in it. Right? This is actually very important. So bar abosai, again remember, you dig a bar, there's no other intervening force that allows that bar to be a damaging presence. Bar just damages. Right? In other words, contrast it with Aish. Right? Remember, you're going to say, how does Aish damage? Only when there's another force introduced. What's the other force? What's it? Wind. Because remember again, without wind, the fire is stationary. The fire is stationary, it's not or it might be damaging that which is sitting on top, but Lamaisa, again, remember the fire starts out in my domain. So therefore the Gemara says as follows. So if at the end of the day, this isn't bar, right? So again, let's just be clear on the case. I place the objects on my rooftop. When Ruach Mitsuya comes along, blows it off. Now it's in the Rosh Hashanah. We're saying I didn't make it hefker, and now someone gets damaged by it. So what is that? It can't be bar. Because unlike bar doesn't have an intervening force, right? This has an intervening force. Eish tocheach. So I'll say maybe it's Eish. Mala Eish shekin darko leilech ulahazik. So we'll say, so ultimately again, Eish will prove this. So we'll say, because Eish does have an intervening force. Right? Eish does have an intervening force. To which the Gemara says, Eish tochiach. So let Eish carry the day, because Eish, I will say, does begin by being a damaging force. The problem with Eish is that again, Eish has an intervening force. So bar tochiach, v'chazra din. So we go back and forth and we say essentially, lo reizeh k'reizeh, lo reizeh k'reizeh. The cases are dissimilar. What's the tzad hashava? What is the common denominator? The common denominator, I will say, becomes an item that has the capacity to damage. Ultimately, again, a responsibility to guard it is mine, and it's owned by me. So too it comes to include this case. So we'll say, so pause here for just a second. What are we trying to accomplish over here? Right. So remember again, just to clarify, the Mishnah gave me 4 categories of damages. Okay. The Mishnah then told me how each one is different from the other, and we just saw an additional way that each of them are different from one another. Then the Mishnah ended off with a mahatzad. A matzad means what is the common denominator. But I will say, but common denominators also create overarching rules. What's the common denominator? The common denominator between the 4 categories of damages is that all 4 are things which have the ability to damage, right? Have the ability to damage. I am responsible to prevent them from damaging. I own those items. So to any other case that falls into that rule, one will also be responsible for damages. So we'll say, what we're trying to do right now is to figure out, so what other cases fit into that rule? That's what we're trying to figure out. So now, Abaye came along and just gave us a new case, right? Abaye says, what's the case that fits into that rule? Here it is. I placed my stone, my knife, or my package on top of my roof. Now what happens? The wind blew it off. Ruach Mitsuya, regular wind, which means what? I was negligent, I didn't secure it enough. So a regular wind comes along, blows it off. Now it's on the ground. And halacha l'maisa, I wasn't mafkirit, I didn't make it hefker, so therefore it's not bar. So it's on the ground, and someone trips over it, right? Or someone gets cut by the knife. What's the halacha? I'm liable. Why am I liable? Because the case fits into the paradigm. Because why? It is an object that has the capacity to damage. I have a responsibility to watch over it, and it's owned by me. So boom, so here it is, right? So the Gemara just gave me an additional case that ultimately, again, fit into the paradigm as espoused to the Mishnah. Good. I'm sorry? That's the whole point. It doesn't fall into a category. That's the whole idea. Once you create a principle, now again, it could fit into a category depending on a whole variety of different things. Maybe it's still bar according to Shmuel, because Shmuel holds a bar doesn't have to be hefker, but that's the whole point. The whole point is the Ma'atzad created a paradigm or created a rule, and if you satisfy this criteria, then there is liability. So Rava says, Rava Amar, so I'll say all we're trying to do, and it's going to be the majority of the staff, try to figure out additional cases which fall under the rubric of this rule or the umbrella of this. So Rava says, interesting, Lasuye bar hamiskalgel baragle adam ubaragle behema. So Rava said, this is actually very interesting. It's very interesting. Rava says it comes to include a case of a rolling bar. A rolling bar. So a pit, right, a rolling bar that is kicked around by the feet of people or by the feet of animals. So I will say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. What does it mean, a rolling bar? So look at Rashi. Boro ha-meskalgel. Rashi says, Kigon hiniach even b'rshus harabim. We'll say, here's the case. I placed a rock in the Rosh Hashanah. And what happens? He says, Uba oda b'mkoma lo hizika. When I placed the rock down, the rock did not damage anything. V'gilgala ragle adam ubehema lemakom achar ve'zika sham. So Rabbi says, it's an interesting case. So I placed the rock down in Rosh Hashanah. Now, both say, are you allowed to place a rock down in Rosh Hashanah? Are you allowed to? No, but I did. But when I did, it didn't do anything. Then what happened? So obviously, again, the stone got kicked around in Rosh Hashanah, either by animals or by people. And then I will say what ended up happening. It landed somewhere else. And in that second location, it did damage. It's an interesting case, right? So now the shaila is, what's my liability? So watch this. So Rava Amar Lasuye Bar HaMisra, Rava says the rule of our Mishnah, the ma'atzad of our Mishnah, comes to include this case. Now what's the case? The Gemara says, Heichidami, what's the case? Idafkarinu. So if I placed the stone down and I made it hefker, so bein l'Rav, bein l'Shmuel hainu bar. They're both say again, remember, a hefker object in Rishus Harabim is going to be bar. So I will say if I placed it down and I made it hefker, that's bar. And once it's bar, even if it's kicked around, I'm still liable for that. Okay. So the Gemara says, because why? Maishna bar shekain tchilas asiyos lo nezek, because a bar from its inception, right, is ready to damage. Ushmirasa alecha, and I have responsibility to guard it. Haninami tchilas asiyos lo nezek ushmirasa alecha. So to, I will say, if I place a stone down, I make it hefker. From the beginning, it's ready to damage, and I have responsibility to prevent it from damaging. So I will say, if you're telling me that I'm placing a stone down, I made it hefker, then it got kicked around, that's bar. So rather, Ella de lo afkarinu. Oh, so it must be what? It must be that halacha l'maisa, I placed the stone down and I didn't make it hefker. Okay. So the Gemara says, L'Shmuel damar kula miboro lamanu hainu bar. So according to Shmuel, that says that halacha l'maisa, even if it's not hefker, it still becomes bar. So this will be bar. So the olam dafkarinu. So in reality, I made it hefker. I placed the stone down, I made it hefker, and now it got kicked around, and in its new kicked around location, that's where it does damage. Velo dami labar. But it's different than bar. Why is it different than bar? Both is incredible. Ma labar shekein ma'asav garmulo. They'll say, when it comes to bar, whose actions cause the damage? Whose action caused the damage? Me. Right? In other words, I dug the bar, or remember again, I placed the object, the stumbling block in the Rosh Hashanah, and therefore again, my placement is what created the damage. Rabbi say this case is different over here, right? Tomar Bahani, Shein Massive Gomer. Rabbi say, did I cause the damage in this case? Did I cause the damage in this case? Not really, right? I placed the stone down, but my action did not cause the damage. What caused the damage is that people or animals kicked the stone somewhere else, and the stone in its new location ended up causing damage. But I really didn't do it. I didn't do it. So the Gemara says, so shar yochiach, but shar is different. I will say shar will prove the point, because what is shar? I will say ultimately, again, in the case of shar, the owner of the animals, they didn't cause any damage, yet they are still liable for the damage that the axe does. Look at Rashi, shar yochiach, shein maseh bailim garmu ha'hezek, ela mamono hezek, vainu atzar hashava dinakab mas nisin. So shar is interesting because you must remember again, shar, I the owner of the ox, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything, because remember again, the case of shar is not necessarily a case of negligence where I was negligent with my ox. My ox just went off, right? So l'maisa, again, shar is a perfect example, or even though I did not do anything to cause the damage, I am still liable. To which the Gemara says, shar mal shar shekein darko leilech ulahazek. But shar is different, says Gemara. Why? Because shar is common for a shar to do damage. Bar tochiach. So the pit will prove the point. To which the Gemara says, Chazra din lo reizek reizeh. So I'll say the point is we go with this case over here, that this case doesn't really fit into any of the previous categories, right? So remember again, to be clear, what's Rava's case? Rava's case is I place the stone down in Rosh Hashanah, right? And what happens? It gets kicked around by people or by animals. In its new location, after it's been kicked around, then it does damage. So interestingly enough, this case doesn't really fit in to any of the previously established cases. It doesn't fit into the case of shar, right? It doesn't fit into the case of bar. So therefore we'll say, so what is it? To which the Gemara answers, there is liability. Why is there liability? Based on the mahatzad of the Mishnah. Based on the rule established. What's the rule established in the Mishnah? Anything that has the capacity to damage, that you are responsible to watch, right? And that is owned by you. Any of those things, right? If it satisfies those three criteria, there is liability. So I will say, in this case, when I placed the stone down in Rosh Hashanah, and again it's kicked around and ultimately does damage, that case satisfies those three criteria, and ultimately, again, there's liability. So remember, this is all we're trying to do right now. We're just trying to find, whenever the Mishnah goes ahead and mentions a rule, in this case, the matzah, the common denominator, it's coming to include additional cases more than those mentioned in the Mishnah. So we're just coming up with the additional cases which can now generate liability as a result of the mahatzad of the Mishnah. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Ravad bar Ava Amar. So Ravad bar Ava is another case. He says la'asuye hadesanya, to include the following situation. Listen to this. Kol elu sha'amru poskin. This is actually a fascinating case. Kol elu sha'amru poskin bivosehen ve'garfin ma'arosein bimosachama ein lem rishus. Okay, so let me tell you this case. So here it is. So remember again, person has a home. There's no indoor plumbing. There's no indoor plumbing. So what did people do? It's actually interesting. We just did this last night in Yomi, right? Li'es mitzo. The Gemara discusses what's the most important thing to have at your disposal whenever you need it. A bathroom, a beis hakisei. So remember again, a person had a bathroom, but what did the bathroom consist of? Right, a hole in the ground outhouse. So what do you have on the outhouse? You have like a pit, like essentially. It's like a sewer pit. It's like a sewer pit without a sewer, right? So in other words, so you have the waste accumulates in a pit. Every once in a while, you have to clear that out. So I would say, so where are you clearing that out into? So interestingly enough, it seems to be the place where they cleared it out into was Rishus Harabim. Good idea to stay home that day, right? No traveling. Rishus Harabim. Now, here's what's interesting. So there are halachos concerning how you're allowed to go ahead and clear out your sewer pit. So the halacha is as follows. You are allowed to do it during the rainy season, not during the summer season. So which makes sense, right? Why? Because during the rainy season, hopefully everything gets just washed away. And anyway, during the rainy season, the roads are muddy anyway, right? In other words, people are expecting some level of dirt, of waste. So again, that was common. But during the summertime, you can't do it because during the summertime, there's no rain, right? And ultimately, again, everything just ends up sitting there. So watch this. He says, "Kolelu sha'amru." All of the cases that we mentioned, poskin bivosein, that literally again clean out your pits, the garfen marosein, and literally again shovel out the caves. Not cleaning out the sewers. Bimosachama just during the summertime you can't do it. But during the wintertime you can do it. So we'll say, so now take a look, first of all, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Kol elu sha'amru, v'kachashev azaluhu, elu aposkim bivoseim, v'garfim ma'aroseim kilomar, Kol elu sha'amru chachamim, sheishan rishus lahashlich niskem sham. Now, boss, you have to understand how unique this is. By allowing people to clean out their sewers into Rosh Hashanah, folks say, what are you effectively allowing? What are you effectively allowing? You're allowing people to place stumbling blocks, right? So in other words, cleaning out waste into Rosh Hashanah is pretty wild. In other words, people could slip on that, right? Animals could slip on that, right? People could be, right? Somebody could put down their produce and it could be totally ruined. In other words, you are allowing for people to put a damaging force into Rosh Hashanah. You're allowing them to do it. So what's the halacha? What's the halacha? The Gemara says you're allowed to afal pi shebershus im hiziku chayavim l'shalem. Fascinating, no? Even though you are allowed to put your produce out there, right? You are allowed to do this, but understand if you did so and it damages, you chayiv. Fascinating, right? So in other words, I am allowed to clean out my sewer pit, but again, halacha l'maisa, if I did it and it damages, I am liable. And a very interesting halacha. So you are allowed to go ahead and empty out the sewer pit into Rosh Hashanah only during the rainy season, but you must do so with care and concern, because if somehow you damage your chayiv. So Gemara says, what's the case? Heichi dami. So we'll say, what are we talking about? So like, if at the end of the day, if you can imagine that like, I'm shoveling out my sewer pit and I throw a shovel full of waste, right? And I'm not looking and it hits someone and knocks them over and they fall down. He'll say, so again, not pretty, but lamaisa, that's kocho. So then that's adam hamazik, right? That's adam hamazik. That's a case of a person who's directly damaging. Ella basar denayich. Rather, what must the case be? It must be that the case is where I emptied out the sewer pit, the waste is in Rosh Hashanah, right? And once it's there, it damages someone. So right? Someone slips on it and falls. So what's the case? Idafkarinhu. Say if I made it hefker, to bin the Rabbi and the Shmuel Hanu bar. So we'll say if I made it hefker, then what? That's bar. So the Gemara says, Maishna bar, because why? Because what's bar? Bar, the tchilas asiyas lenezek, because remember again, a bar from its inception damages, umamoncha, and it's owned by me, ushmiras alech, and I have responsibility to guard it. Haninami, this also, tchilas asiyas lenezek, umamoncha, ushmiras alecha. So we'll say this case as well. Again, that would be a case of, remember, shoveling out the waste into Rosh Hashanah has the capacity to damage from the outset. It's owned by me, and I have responsibility to guard it. So if we're just talking about a case, we'll say, so again, if it's about a case, I'm shoveling out the waste, and I throw a shovel full at someone, and it hits them and knocks them over, so that's kocho, that's adam hamazik, that's a person who damages. If I shoveled it out and it's sitting in a shtarabim, right, and I was mafkirt, I made it hefker, and now halacha l'maisa, someone slips on it and falls, that's bar. Ella delo afkarinu. Rather, it must be a case where what? I shoveled it out into shtarabim and I didn't make it hefker. Okay. L'shmuel damar kula mibora lamanu hainu bar. Suppose it's still according to Shmuel, that would still be a case of bar. To which the Gemara says, you're right. The olam da'afkarinu. In reality, I shoveled out the waste. It's sitting in Rosh Hashanah, and I did make it hefker. It's hefker. So why isn't it bar? To which the Gemara says, why isn't it bar? To which the Gemara says, "V'lo dami lebar, ma lebar shekin lo birshos." Wow. Tomar bahani shebershos. I'll tell you why it's not bar. Why isn't it bar? Because bar is something you do without permission. You don't have a right to dig a pit in Rosh Hashanah. You don't have a right to leave a stumbling block in Rosh Hashanah. So the whole essence of bar is you're doing something without permission. But I will say, but what's different about this case? You have permission, you have license. right? You have a license to shovel, right? You have a license, right? You have a license to go ahead and clean out the sewer pit. So it's not bar. So the Gemara says, Amud Beis, shar yochiach. So shar will prove, say, because shekein darko leilechu lahazik. So we'll say shar is a perfect case. Why? I have a right to have a shar. Rashi says over shar yochiach, top Rashi, Bava Beis 6b, shebir shus beis din hu mahalech v'rshus harabim, shar kol adam yesh lo rshus bekach. So we'll say shar is a perfect example. My shar, I have permission to have a shar, right? I have permission for my shar to walk around. Yet there is still liability for my shar. Shekein darko leilechu lahazik bar tochiach. No, but Pit will prove the other point. I will say so. V'chazra din lo reizeh k'reizeh. So I will say. So bottom line, the Gemara says you're right. The cases are this case doesn't neatly fit into any one of the categories. Right? That's what we're trying to highlight over here. I will say, remember again, we have one simple mission. What's our mission? We're trying to figure out what additional cases could fit into the Mahatzad. Let's try to figure out. So I will say, so this is a great case over here. So I'll tell you a case. A case is where a guy with permission is cleaning out his sewer pit. The waste lands in Rosh Hashanah, right? Someone, right? He makes it hefker, and someone goes ahead and slips on it and is injured, and there's liability. So what case is that? So I will say, it's not bar, right? Why isn't it bar? It's not bar because at the end of the day, I have permission to go ahead and, right? I have permission to go ahead and shovel it out. It's not shar. Why is it not shar? Because the derech of shar is to go and to be mazik. So what is it? And the answer is, you're right. It doesn't neatly fit into any one of the categories. So why are you liable? I'm liable because it conforms to the rule. What's the rule? The rule is object that has the ability to damage. I have the responsibility to watch over it, and it belongs to me, right? So ultimately, again, because it fits into that category, therefore there is going to be liability. Incredible. I will say, by the way, a tremendous Musar Haskell from this case of Poskin Vivo saying the Garfin Maro saying, right, of cleaning out the sewer pit. I will say, what's the Musar Haskell? The Musar Haskell is at some point in time, everyone has to clean out the schmutz that has accumulated inside. And I will say it happens to all of us. Right? We tend to go ahead and we usually do this once a year, right? The once a year is called Elul, right? Where I look inside the pit, right? I look inside the repository, right? And I go ahead and I clean out all of the schmutz that's accumulated over there. But the reality is, it's not a once a year thing. I will say the process of cheshbon hanefesh, the process of introspection, of looking inside and identifying what's broken, what's misfiring, what's not working well, what needs to be repaired, is a process that we have to engage in on a fairly regular basis. How often? That depends on the person. So for some people, do a cheshbon hanefesh every single day. Other people once a week. Some people once a month. But probably shouldn't be any longer or any less frequent than once a month. And I will say, just to be clear, sometimes a person does a cheshbon hanefesh, and I find the schmutz that's accumulated. And to be honest, sometimes I'll say to myself, you know what? I'm not ready to clean out that schmutz. I'm not ready to do that. For whatever the reason, people sometimes become very connected to their schmutz, right? But maybe I'm not ready to clean out the pit just yet. I would say, so sometimes that's okay. Sometimes for whatever the reason, I'm not ready to tackle certain issues. But even if I'm not ready to tackle the issues, it's so important to be aware of the issues, right? So often in life, we ignore stuff. And ignoring problems is the worst thing in the world. You can't necessarily solve everything right now, but I should always be at least aware and cognizant of the stuff that needs to be cleaned out. And even if I'm not ready to clean it right now, at least I know it needs to be cleaned, and at some point in time, I know I'll find the courage to confront. But the same way Chazal gave permission to clean out the sewer pits, right, at certain times during the year, so important for us to be cognizant, to do cheshbon hanefesh, to introspect, and be ready to clean out the stuff that accumulates as well. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says like this, so we'll say, Ravina Amar. So we'll say Ravina gives another case. These are all great cases. They're fascinating because, again, I will say, as Moshe really pointed out before, remember the whole chap of these cases is they don't neatly fit into any of the aforementioned or created categories. That's the whole chap, right? So they go ahead and they don't really, but because of the Mahatzad kind of gives me an overarching framework to fit this stuff in. Ravina says, Lasui hadisnan, it includes that which you mentioned. Listen to this. Listen to this case. Let's say I have a wall or a tree, right? And my wall or my tree fell into the public domain and damaged. So what's the halacha? Pater milashalim. I'm exempt. Very interesting. So the Gemara says, however, let's say again, Beis comes along, right? And Beis sees that tree not looking good, or the wall not looking good. And Beis says, within 30 days, you need to take down that tree, right? Or take down or repair that wall. And then what happens? V'naflu. It falls down. Now, if it's besoch hazman, vezigo pater. So we'll say if the tree or the wall falls down within the time I had to repair it, then I'm pater, right? Because again, it's not my fault. I had time to repair it. It fell down early. I'm pater. La'achar hazman chayiv. But if it falls down after the time, so the Beis Din gave me 30 days. On day 32, the wall falls down, the tree falls down. I'm going to be chayiv. So the Gemara says, "Heichi dummy. What's the case?" So we'll say, so now remember. So let's go back for just a second. So now what we're saying is as follows. So if you in general, so there's really two cases over here. Case number one is stam, my wall or my tree, which is totally fine, totally normal, falls down into Rosh Hashanah and damages, I'm pater. The variation on that case is, if Beis Din walked by and said, hey, that tree or that wall does not look good, and they gave me 30 days, I'm using 30 days just as an arbitrary number, they gave me 30 days to repair it. If it falls down within 30 days, I'm going to be pater. If it falls down after 30 days, I'm going to be chayiv. Gemara says, what's the case here? Heichi dami, what's the case? Ida afkara, so we'll say, if I made the tree or the wall hefker, then bein l'Rav, bein l'Shmuel, hainu bar. Then we'll say again, so if we're talking about a case where I made the tree or the wall hefker, it fell down, now it's sitting in Sarabim, somebody trips over it and falls, so then what? That's bar. So the Gemara says, Maishna bar, because why? What's unique about bar? Maishna bar, de ziko matzo yeshu nasa alecha. Bar is unique, I will say why. Because bar, at the end of the day, again, hezeko matzo, it commonly damages, right? Or it's common for it to damage. I have responsibility to guard it, right? So then ultimately, again, if I made the tree and the wall hefker, then it's bar. Idalo afkarinu, if I did not make it hefker, then the Shmuel da'amar klulam mi boro lamanu hainu bar. According to Shmuel, it'll still be bar. According to Rav, maybe not. Fine. So Shmuel says you're right. The olam da'afkarinu. In reality, I made it hefker. So the tree on the wall fell down, or even before the tree on the wall fell down, I made it hefker, and ultimately, again, now it's a bar. So the Gemara says, velo dami labar, but it's still not like a case of bar. Why not? Listen to this. Ma labar shekain tchilas asiyas lenezek. We'll say, remember again, a bar from its inception is what? Is a damaging force. That's the whole chab, right? In other words, the bar in its essence, a bar in its essence is a damaging force, right? A bar, it's sitting there. So either I actually dig a bar, or I leave an object in Rosh Hashanah from the beginning, that item is a damaging force. Tomar bahani shein tchilas asiyas lenezek. Rabbi said it's different in this case. Why? Because in this case, Rabbi said it's a wall and it's a tree. From its inception, it's not a damaging force. It's not a damaging force. To which the Gemara says, Shar yochiach. Okay, so we'll look at Shar. We'll say, what's unique about Shar? Shar from its inception is also not a damaging force, right? A Shar is a Shar. Shar is an ox. Not a damaging force, yet you're still responsible. So you can see from here that when the tree or the wall falls down, ultimately you'll be responsible as well. Here's the difference. Mal Shar shekin dako leilech ulahazik. While it's true that a Shar from its inception is not a damaging force, but nevertheless what? It is common, right? The derech of a shar is to do damage. That's different than a tree and a wall, where again, its derech is not to do damage. Portochiach, v'chazra adin, also we keep going back and forth. Remember again, lo ra'izeh k'ra'izeh, v'lo ra'izeh k'ra'izeh. So this case of Ravina, of the wall or the tree that fell down, and now is in the Shirabim and does damages someone, is not like bar. Right? Why is it not like bar? It's not like bar because halacha l'maisa, bar from its inception is a damaging force. This is not a damaging force. It's also not like shar. Why is it not like shar? It's the derech of shar to damage. It's not the derech of a tree or of a wall to damage. So we'll say, so what category does it fall into? And what's the answer? None of the above. But what does it fall into? The Mahatzad. So I will say, so remember again, what is the Mahatzad? What is the common denominator? What does the paradigm teach us? Any case where what? Where ultimately, again, an item has an ability to damage, it's owned by me, and I have, or really number two is, item has ability to damage, I have responsibility to guard it, and it's owned by me, I'm going to be chayiv. Therefore, I will say this case of Ravina. So we'll say, so now what we've successfully done is Abaye, Rav Ada Bar Ava, and Ravina have given three different cases, interesting damage cases that don't really neatly fit into any one of the aforementioned or previously established four categories of damages. And that's why the Mahatzad of the Mishnah comes to teach you liability in all of these cases. Really interesting. Really interesting. Good. Let's go back there. Kishechizik chav hamazik. So we'll say, so remember again. So now we're just quoting from the Mishnah. After the Mishnah quoted the Mahatzad, after the Mishnah quoted the common denominator, ultimately again the paradigm. So the Mishnah said ukishehizik chav hamazik. So any case that falls into the paradigm, kishehizik, when damage was done, chav hamazik. The damager is liable. Someone just asks a syntax question. The Gemara says, chav hamazik, chayiv hamazik mibayle. Why does the Mishnah say chav hamazik? It should say chayiv. It's just a textual question, right? Why doesn't it say chayiv? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Hai Tana Yerushalmihu. The Tana is a Yerushalmi. The Tani Lishna Kalila. Ultimately, the Yerushalmiim, right, were known for using truncated lashon. They spoke shorthand. I don't know if you could speak shorthand, right? But they spoke in a more abbreviated, a more truncated fashion. Also, it's interesting. The Gemara says it's almost like the way the Gemara says it is, he's Yerushalmi. Also, like there's no greater compliment in the world than being called a Yerushalmi, right? A Jew who's able to say, who am I? I'm a Yerushalmi. I've always been jealous of that. So imagine being able to say, I am a Yerushalmi, right? My identity is intertwined with Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh. Incredible. In any event, the Yerushalmi will say, by the way, so just to point out over here, we see this all the time. One of the reasons I will say why Talmud Yerushalmi is so much harder than Talmud Bavli. In other words, we think Bavli is hard because it's a different language, right? It's Aramaic. But Bavli at least is written out in full sentences, right? Yerushalmi is not full sentences. Yerushalmi is not full sentences, which is what makes it that much more complicated. So this is an expression over here. So here's a perfect example. Bavli, you would write chayiv. You write chayiv because why not write chayiv? Yerushalmi, they wrote in a more abbreviated form, so they would just say chav. Chav. Okay, beautiful. Simar says as follows. The Gemara says, I will say, I'll point out to you, just as an aside, why here? So why out of all places, why in Arba Avos Nezikin, ultimately again, is the Tana a Yerushalmi, who says Chav HaMazik? Why here? I will say, what's the whole chap of our Mishnah? The whole chap of our Mishnah is, if you damage something, what's your obligation? Make it whole. I will say, so what's the embedded message in the Mishnah? Who's speaking over here? A Yerushalmi. And what is Yerushalmi saying? The ultimate thing that's been damaged for Klal Yisrael is the Beis HaMikdash, is that which resides in Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh. But what does the Mishnah say? Any damages must always be made whole. And the Tana from Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh, what is he telling us in a little bit of a subliminal message? Don't worry. Don't despair. Because even that which was damaged, even that which was destroyed, our beautiful Beis HaMikdash, one day Emirat Hashem will be made whole as well. So we'll say, let's go weiter. Incredible Gemara. So let's go weiter. It says the Gemara, L'shalim tashlumei nezek, ultimately again to go ahead and pay tashlumei nezek. So this is just a quotation from the end of the Mishnah. So we'll say, so now remember, the end of the Mishnah actually said, L'shalim tashlumei nezek b'meitav haaretz, that you have to pay damages, and when you pay damages, if you're paying from real estate, you have to pay from the best land. So let's go weiter. It says Gemara, Tan Rabbanon, meitav sadeo meitav Kamma yishalim. So we'll say, so the pasuk says, you have to pay from the best of your field field and the best of your vineyard. Now, I will say, this is an incredible machlokes, which at least, wow, we're really running behind. I don't know what happened. All right, such a short Amala. Okay, in any event, so the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, so meitav sadeo, meitav Kamma yishali. Meitav sadeo shal nizak, or meitav Kamma shal nizak dev Rabbi Shal. Oh, I will say, so now we are coming to one of the most dramatic machloksim that we're going to have by damages. Now, I will say, when we say that you have to pay the best of your field, who's best? Right? Who, based on who are we evaluating best? So Rabbi Shmuel says it's based on the property of the damaged party. Damaged party. Let's say take a quick look at Rashi. Rashi's towards the top of the daf in the shorter lines, 6 lines in. Meitav sadeu shal nizak, shem achla aruga besadeu, shamin aruga mishubachos shal nizak, Kamma yafa achshel perosel, the Kamma te yafe below peros venosel. So we'll say here's the Havamina. The Havamina is like this. Imagine my animal goes into Ruvain's field and eats a row of produce. So what do we do? How do we assess damages? So it sounds like what we're saying right now is Rabbi Shmuel saying like this. We look at the best row of produce in Ruvain's field. And we assess like this. How much is that row worth with produce? And how much is that row worth without produce? And that's the amount of damages. That's the amount of damages. So we'll say it's interesting. Which is strange about it is it sounds like it's not based on what? It's not based on what my animal ate, but rather it's based on what the loss would be if Reuven suffered the loss of his best row of produce, which sounds a little bit strange, which we'll see. Rabbi Kiva says, no. Rabbi Kiva says, no, that's not what it's coming to do. Rabbi Kiva says, the pasuk is only coming to teach us that Allah Chalamaisa, you collect from damages from the best property. Kavachomer lehekdish. Ultimately, again, kavachomer, ultimately from hektish. We'll see exactly what that means. But Allah Rabbi Akiva is saying, when we say that you collect from this best property of who? Best property of who? Damager. So specifically, if you're paying in real estate, ultimately you have to pay from the best produce, from the best real estate. I will say we'll stop over here for today. Again, coming attractions, ridiculously good. This is one of the most yesodistic machloksim we're going to find. Ultimately, again, b'denizak shaiminan, b'demazak shaiminan. When we pay damages based on whose property is damaged, assess damages property, damaged party's property. Emir Hashem tomorrow. Shkoyach. Have a great day. All right, Chav, have a great day, everyone. Chav on Zoom. Kovac's family, beautiful. Baruch Hashem.